ready is Anna Meng, and I'd like to introduce her. Anna is Stewardship Ecologist with the Toronto Nature Stewards, a grassroots initiative to increase volunteer stewardship of the urban ravines and natural areas of Toronto. And his current project is to develop an ecological monitoring protocol to measure changes in invasive and native plant populations in TNS's stewardship sites. In this presentation, Anna will discuss how TNS has collaborated with the City of Toronto Urban Forestry to develop a scalable, volunteer-led model of stewardship. And I'll hand it over to you now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, for the introduction. And I just wanted to say whoever came up with today's schedule is very clever, because this is sort of the next part of the story coming off of Sheila's presentation. So also thank you, Sheila, for all the advocacy that you do, and I hope you listen closely to this.
Right. Emily is the mastermind behind the order.
Amazing. I'm going to share.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, you share your screen. I'm just going to, I'll keep my mic on until it's working, and then I'll disappear.
Awesome. All right. Okay.
Okay.
That is not the beginning. All right. So it's good now?
Yes, great.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Anna. I've been working with the Toronto Nature Stewards for the past 2 years, first as the volunteer coordinator and now as the stewardship ecologist. Today, I'm going to share with you guys a good news story, which is, I know, something that we all probably need right now. So here's a story of what happens when you empower community to care for nature. And it's also a story about building bridges between municipality and citizen, between scientists and volunteers, Indigenous and settler, and humans and nature. So here is the story of Toronto Nature Stewards. To set the context, we're here in Toronto, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Toronto is an urban landscape with 2.8 million people, and also calling this land home is an uncountable number of trees, birds, mammals, fish, insects, plants, and other life forms. As one of our volunteers said, the ravines and natural areas is our treasure, and it supports all this life. Now, this next part of the story, you're probably familiar with in some context. Over the past century, as urbanization increased, nature suffered for it. And research from a series of studies found, unsurprisingly, a declining trend in the health of the ravines, and one of the primary suspects being invasive plants. So the TRRS pictured there was actually the predecessor of Toronto Nature Stewards. It's clear that we will continue down this trajectory unless there is consistent and long-term intervention. But can we change the trajectory, and how do we do this? So in our local context in Toronto, there's a ravine strategy from the City of Toronto, and they identified the need to increase volunteer stewardship. And the presentation after mine is from the City of Toronto's supervised stewardship program, so you'll be hearing from them as well. But there was a significant roadblock following the ravine strategy in getting started. The ravine bylaw, it protects the ravines from certain activities, but it also acts as a barrier to community-led stewardship. On public land, volunteers cannot legally remove plant material, including invasive plants or plant native plants, without city supervision. And there's just not enough city resources to cover the entire 11,000 hectares of land. So now this is the part of the story where TNS comes in. Just 2 years young, Toronto Nature Stewards is an organization that is almost entirely volunteer-based, except for 2 staff people, including myself. And our mission is to engage and educate the people of Toronto in the stewardship of our ravines and natural areas. So 2 key words here being engage and educate. And what I mean by that is engaging by educating and educating by engaging. In 2021, with the indispensable cooperation and support from the city's Parks, Forestry, and Recreation Department, we worked together to try to find a solution around the bylaw. And our solution was to launch a pilot program of stewardship on public land, led by volunteers, unsupervised by city staff, on the condition that the volunteer leaders go through a training program. Now, this training program was built to prepare individuals in good field practices, invasive plant ID and removal, and volunteer leadership. And at the end of the training course, they become what we call a lead steward. So each lead steward is qualified to supervise up to 10 volunteer stewards on public ravine land. Now, this training program was molded by many hands and brains. And here I should mention that TNS is an outreach program of the University of Toronto Institute of Forestry and Conservation. And this connection is integral as a source of scientific knowledge, as well as access to students and graduates to hire. And that's where I came from. So we also have local experts and ecological restoration practitioners providing input and conducting some of our training sessions. And finally, we've had lots of mutual benefit from our partnerships with other organizations and groups. But the learning and the engagement doesn't stop there. So each lead steward operates their own site on a decentralized model. So they do recruit, they bring together their community, and then they train their volunteer stewards in best practices while having the expertise and resource of TNS behind them. And while they're there in the ravines and parks, they also educate other park users and neighbors. And of course, they get down in the dirt and they get the work done. So we launched this lead steward training program in 2021, and it was a great success. We started with 23 trained lead stewards who recruited 153 volunteers. And we learned a lot in our pilot year and came back in 2022 with an improved training program, a new website, and significant growth. We just kicked off this year's training exactly 1 week ago. And by the end of the winter training, we expect to have 100 lead stewards who will engage about 700 volunteer stewards. So through all of this process, we realized one thing is that there is a pent-up and overwhelming demand from the people to care for the land with their own hands. And you heard that from Sheila's presentation as well. And now that's the people side of the story. The second part lies in the ravines and natural areas. All of this engagement and education, what is it really good for? How is it actually affecting the ravines? And are we making an impact on their trajectory? So the work that's being done on the ground primarily is removing invasive plants. Currently, we have permission to remove the following 12 species and hope to add more this year in 2023. So the information and best practices for each species, which we train our stewards and lead stewards on, is primarily sourced from the OIPC's BMPs. So thank you for those, which we condense into short 1 to 2 page field-friendly guides for our volunteers. We don't use heavy machinery or pesticides and only hand pulling and tools. And importantly, we're currently working on a protocol to pilot planting of native plants in the spaces where we've removed invasives. So despite just 2 years of stewardship intervention, we are actually finding a lot of positive and encouraging results at our sites. And so I'm going to show you some examples. So once removing the invasive plants, mostly garlic, mustard, and dog strangling vine here, they create space for the native plants, and eventually these populations will strengthen and thrive. So next, this site used to be a dumping ground for construction debris. So the lead stewards in their group first removed whatever debris they could, and then consulted a soil expert who advised them to mulch the bare soil with organic matter and leaves. So they did that, and the results after 1 year is significant improvement. And now here's my last example. On the left, you see a patch of Japanese knotweed dominating the space. So after 1 year of removal, within the same year, well, this is the second year of stewardship, but within the same year, the native jewelweed immediately filled in the space. And of course, the battle for long-term dominance will still take some years, but it's a very positive preliminary sign. Now, to track the actual progress on the ground, ecological monitoring is key. So we're in the progress of developing a protocol, and I'll share a few results about this, this particular patch. So in a 10 by 10 meter square, about 2,800 stems of Japanese knotweed was removed. And just condensing it down to this picture, which is roughly about 8 meters squared visible, it takes one steward 30 minutes and times 2 cuts. So one steward, 1 hour to have this effect. Now, being able to turn the tides like this, even in just a small area, is very encouraging. So what is the extent to this? And what is the area that we are covering? In our pilot year, we started out with 9 sites, and this progressed to 22 the next year, and a significant growth in the hectares. This year, we had a real focus on filling in some geographic gaps, and so we're hopeful to start the year with 34 sites and over 100 hectares spanning across the city. Now, again, this is all very encouraging, but there's still definitely a lot of work to do. And to actually influence the trajectory, we need to be both consistent and have the effort continue over a long period of time. And so because of that, we need to make sure that this program is both sustainable as well as scalable. Over the 2 years, we've had 631 events across the sites, and each site sometimes receives this episodic intervention as a pop-up event, but most frequently they have weekly events, and in some cases 2 to 3 times per week. Across the 70 hectares, 7,440 person hours were put into stewardship. That's nearly a full year's worth of work, nonstop. And of course, the consistency makes a huge difference. So on average, each site receives stewardship care for 8 to 12 hours per week. Now, all these numbers would not be possible without the decentralized model, where each site operates on its own schedule and its own resources. So this lowers the cost, of course, and also is really important because now the stewards and the people doing the work are the experts of their own site. And we're really focused on building up the quality of the volunteers and building up the experience of the leaders that we do have, and put less focus on high attendance of events. So overall, this model has shown to be both scalable and sustainable, and it's also applicable to other municipalities wanting to make a local impact. And what is not quantifiable is the connection and experience between the volunteers and the land. So I'm going to share some words and testimonials from our lead stewards. They've enjoyed the program because they are having the opportunity to learn and
they might not otherwise have access to.
they're being inspired by being part of the solution and part of this good news story and seeing the results of their hard work. And lastly, they're developing relationships with the land and their community, which ensures long-term sustainable care of that same piece of land.
Just want to give you a 2-minute warning, Anna.
Thank you. So part of resiliency, which is the theme, is diversity. And I mentioned at the beginning that this is also a story about building bridges. So I mentioned already the ecological monitoring protocol that we are developing. And the key challenge here being a balance between science and volunteer friendliness. So we're still testing and we're still doing a lot of in-field stuff. Happy to connect if you want to exchange any learnings that you might have. Now, second, TNS is committed to building a sustainable relationship with the Indigenous community, which takes time and consistency, as with everything else that we've talked about. One relationship in particular is with a community on the Humber River. And we've been visiting on a biweekly basis to offer our hand with some of the work and land healing on the land. Of course, there's a long road to reconciliation, and we welcome any input from the community. And now last, out of the 11,000 hectares of ravine land in Toronto, 40% is on private land. And there's a big gap in the education there. So we have on our website simple instructions based on science and expert advice to engage and educate private landowners. If you or your organization works with the private landowners on woodlots or other natural areas, you might find our website a useful resource, or you can get in contact, and it doesn't have to be Toronto specific. So just in conclusion, I'm hoping that you are leaving this presentation feeling just a little bit more positive and optimistic about the state of our world and the future. And if you're interested in getting involved with us, or if you just want to exchange ideas, Toronto or outside of Toronto, please get in contact. So now I will open the floor to questions if we have time.
Don't have time, but as with other speakers, feel free to reach out to Anna in the chat.